the document, the New Testament.
Yep.
But the document shows that Jesus only used that kaine diatheke phrase in Greek, novum testamentum, when he was instituting the Eucharist.
So that Greek word can be translated as testament.
Yeah, kaine, new, diatheke, covenant or testament.
Okay.
Potato, basically, you know.
Okay.
And so he doesn't say, write this in remembrance. He says, do this. But what is this? Well, it's the Eucharist. But they weren't calling it the Eucharist until the final third of the first century. What were they calling it? The New Testament. Why? Because that's what he called it. So what do we conclude? That the New Testament was a sacrament before it started to become a document, according to the document. In the earliest reference to the books of the New Testament, around 191 AD, I lay this all out in my book, Consuming the Word, the New Testament and the Eucharist in the early church, where I showed that the New Testament was the Eucharist in the early church.
Okay.
In 191, we hear about the books of the New Testament. But when you look at that statement in context, the New Testament was still the Eucharist. But these are the books that were written to be read and proclaimed as showing how Christ fulfilled the old. So these are the books of the Eucharist. These are the books of the New Testament. And in the 2nd century, Irenaeus is trying to show what is the source, the authority, and the standard for all of our doctrinal beliefs. He said, we base all of our beliefs upon the Eucharist, which is another way of saying we base all our beliefs upon the New Testament.
Yep.
So when the document is collected and officially canonized, in the second half of the 4th century, it wasn't like the church was in suspended animation. What are we supposed to believe? No,
Right.
Jesus said,
Yeah.
do this. They preach the gospel, they baptize new believers, they celebrate the breaking of the Eucharistic bread in Acts 2, Acts 20, 1 Corinthians. It's the idiomatic expression for what we would call the Eucharistic liturgy.
I think this is a quote from you, and I love it, and I'd love you to expand upon it. You said, I believe, the church is not a manual for a church. Sorry, the Bible is not a manual for a church still in shrink wrap, but the Bible presupposes a church already in existence.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
Another thing that
Because that is how we often look at it, or at least,
I did.
yeah.
I mean, for most of my young adult
Protestants who
life,
might be
spiritual.
trying to start a church, they'll go to the church and go, hey, what should the church look like?
Right.
But as you say, the church the church wrote the Bible.
If you take a living organism out of its natural habitat to study it, say a botanist takes a plant out of the woods and brings it back to the lab and puts it under the hot bright lights and microscopes,
Yeah.
and he wouldn't begin wondering, why is this withering and
Or
dying?
the fish out of the
That's what
ocean.
happens, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you take the New Testament document out of its sacramental context,
Wow.
in which it was written, for which it is written, by which it is proclaimed and fulfilled in the Eucharist, and then, you begin wondering, why are we forming, 20, 30, 40, over 40,000 denominations, all by people who sincerely believe that they're getting it right. They'd pass a polygraph. You could be totally sincere and still be sincerely wrong. But when you put the document back in its Eucharistic habitat, then suddenly you realize this is why we call it not just sacred tradition, but living tradition, because when you read the new in light of the old, and then you hear how the old is fulfilled by the new, this is the DNA of the early church. I know a lot of people debate the merits or the demerits of